Elara lay motionless beneath her ghillie net, her cheek pressed against the damp earth, the weight of her rifle steady against her shoulder. The early light filtered through the pine canopy, casting long, dappled shadows that reached deep into the valley, to a shadow lurking below. Every inch of her was still controlled, waiting through the scope. The target was a commander, not just another, but a man's life. One pull of the trigger, one break in the silence. The mission was simple, yet he was unaware that the forest had already made its own silent decisions. As she adjusted her rifle, she knew that single shot would change everything, not just a life, but the very fundamental rules of existence. Don't miss out on more inspiring stories like this. Subscribe now and follow our channel. Together, let's continue to discover the truth of courage in the mirror. Elara was deep in the tree line, prone on a moss-covered shelf that gave her a commanding view of the valley below. She watched the cabin sat just beyond a cluster of trees, low and weathered, its rusted tin roof barely visible through the morning haze. The enemy commander would be inside by now, likely pacing between his papers and his guards. Unaware that the forest had already made its decision, Elara adjusted her elevation dial by a fraction, then rechecked wind through the flutter of hanging leaves. Barely a whisper. Her breath moved slower than the fog. To her left, far down in the forest basin, the SEAL team moved without sound. She knew the pattern by now. 4 men fanning wide, sweeping low across the undergrowth. They would reach the cabin in a minute. Her shot would signal the breach. She blinked once slowly, keeping her eyes aligned with the reticle. Her heartbeat didn't quicken, it simply existed, calm and consistent. The range had already been calculated, 230 meters, with a slight downhill angle. Wind call stable, no obstacles. The target silhouette moved briefly past the cabin's rear window. Elara didn't follow it. She waited. A crow called from somewhere beyond the ridge. She ignored it. Then another shift. The commander stepped into the doorway, speaking to someone outside. One of the guards, maybe 2. Her reticle hovered just below his collarbone. The trigger pressure was familiar beneath her index finger. The rifle settled. Her lungs emptied. She fired. The sound cracked through the trees, scattering birds into the air. The rifle's recoil came and went, like muscle memory, absorbed in her frame. Through the scope, she saw the commander collapse mid-sentence, folding sideways as his weight went limp. One of the guards shouted something. The other scrambled behind a support beam. Elara already had the bolt cycled, and the casing flicked into the dirt beside her. She did not move from her position. She didn't need to. The target was down. She kept the scope up, waiting for confirmation. Her earpiece remained quiet. No call from the SEALs. No movement toward the cabin. She watched the tray line where they should have emerged. Nothing. The stillness returned. But it felt different now. Wrong. Then came the echo of rifle fire. Not hers. A burst from deeper in the trees. Then another, sharper, closer. She saw one of the guards fall. But it wasn't from friendly fire. Muzzle flashes lit up the ridge above the cabin. 5, maybe 6, scattered across elevation. Elara lowered her scope and pulled back, slithering an inch to her right to grab her pack. The ambush had been waiting, not for the SEALs, but for all of them. Her earpiece cracked to life. Contact front. Multiple tangos above the cabin were split, trying to fall back. But they've got the high ground. The voice was low, strained, too calm for the volume of gunfire that followed it. Elara didn't respond. She knew they weren't asking for chatter. They just wanted her up and moving. She secured her rifle and slid back along the path she had memorized 2 days earlier. It was barely a crawl space between a rock face and a fallen pine trunk, but it led to the next firing shelf. She stayed low, feeling the weight of her pack shift behind her. Her boots moved slow, careful, muted against the leaf litter. This wasn't a clean hit and clear. This was compromise. Somewhere in the forest below, the seals were caught between positions, under fire from an enemy that had planned the terrain better than anyone had expected. Elara didn't need to know the full layout. She understood enough. If the team was pinned, her rifle wasn't done working yet. She reached a small depression under the roots of a twisted oak, low enough to disappear again. She pressed into the mud and brought the rifle back up. The cabin was half visible now through broken pine needles, smoke beginning to curl up through one of the walls. No sign of the commander's body. Didn't matter. The objective had been hit. The rest was survival. She took a slow breath, steadying her eye behind the scope once more. This was different now. The plan was broken. The terrain had turned, and Elara was no longer the first move. She was the only piece left behind enemy lines. She watched a squad of figures moving along the far ridge, staggered across the rocks. Not seals, different gear, faster pace. Elara adjusted the rifle angle and locked the rear monopod into the dirt. Another breath. Another calculation. She didn't fire yet. Her finger rested near the trigger, and her eyes tracked the patrol. Below them, muffled beneath the trees, boots were moving. The seals were still alive, still shifting, still counting on her. She didn't speak. She just waited. Elara moved before the echo of her last shot had fully faded. She kept her body low, sliding downslope through thick ferns and clumped roots, slick with morning moisture. The ghillie was rolled and clipped to her harness now. It would only slow her down beneath her. Automatic fire roared again. This time sharper, more sustained. That wasn't sporadic panic. It was suppressive pinned fire. The seals were caught. The forest here dropped off fast. Angled ledges, fallen logs, narrow deer paths that disappeared into nothing. She took each step with measured haste, feet angled sideways for traction, weight low over her center. The radio buzzed in her earpiece, clipped voices cutting through static. One of the seals barked a bearing. Another shouted a number she didn't catch, followed by something urgent and unfinished. Then silence again. Her boots found the edge of a dry creek bed. The bottom was scattered with leaves and rain-flattened moss, but it curved north just enough to pull her wide of the seal's likely path. Elara followed it at a crouch, moving with the rhythm of her breath. She wasn't thinking about how close the enemy was. She already knew. Gunfire cracked ahead, then faded. Elara climbed out of the creek bed and paused at a slope of exposed stone just before the next ridge. She knew this area from the sat recon. There was a low-rise 30 meters ahead, ringed by boulders, and the half-fallen trunk of a pine that hadn't fully collapsed. It was enough. She darted for it. By the time she reached the rise, her knees were wet and her gloves were streaked with black dirt. She dropped into a prone position behind a tangle of roots and chambered around. Her breathing slowed, the rifle steady. She let her eyes scan first, left to right, top to bottom before committing to glass. Through the scope, the ridgeline came into view. The machine gun nest was dug in just behind a rotted log, flanked by loose stones. Two figures operated the weapon, one feeding, one firing. They were sweeping left, firing short bursts toward a point in the woods she couldn't see. They hadn't spotted her, not yet. She adjusted the elevation slightly. The wind was shifting downhill now, steady, but light. She exhaled. The first shot hit center mass. The gunner went limp, the belt clattering as it spilled from his hands. The assistant dropped instinctively, dragging the weapon with him behind the log. Elara had already moved. She slid sideways, keeping low, boots dragging silently across moss and needles. 10 meters to her right, she dropped behind a natural wedge of earth. Adjusted position, and scoped the second target. He popped up, panicked, trying to reposition the weapon. Her second round dropped him before the gun cleared the top of the log. The radio clicked again. MG position clear. Who took that shot? Elara didn't answer. The SEALs didn't wait for her to. Boots were already moving. She could hear them now, softer than the gunfire, but close. They were falling back. Good. That was the plan. She reached for her bolt, cycled it slow, and kept her cheek to the stock. No movement yet, no second team revealed. The enemy had committed to a broad ambush, but it wasn't organized. That much was clear. They had counted on surprise and numbers, not endurance. Something moved beyond the ridge. A flicker of motion. Elara shifted slightly, but held her fire. A deer broke through the brush, small and fast, its legs churning through shadow. Not a threat, not yet. But the forest was beginning to churn again. She would need to move soon. She rolled onto her side and checked her magazine. 4 rounds left in this one. She had 2 more on her harness. Not enough for a prolonged hold. She couldn't dig in. She had to keep shifting. That was the only reason she was still alive. The only reason they were. Elara slid back down the rise, moving on her belly through a stretch of thick fern. She used her elbow to brush aside a thorn branch without making it snap. Every move was deliberate, every angle planned. She wasn't running from fire, she was staying ahead of it. The SEALs came back on the radio. We're moving east. 2 injuries. You have visual? She raised the rifle again, tracked their shape through the trees. 3 moving upright, 1 slung low. Assisted. No chase yet, but it would come. Elara keyed her mic once, no words, and let the click speak for itself. She had them in sight. A quick pivot, then 1 more slope. The forest here dropped into a ravine lined with heavy stone and tangled root systems. Another good place to vanish, then reappear somewhere new. She moved faster now, knees bent, weight forward, rifle tucked tight to her chest. The chessboard wasn't reset, it was just growing wider. Every shot she took gave away her place. Every second she waited risked someone else getting pinned. Elara didn't need orders. She needed only movement. She reached the next rise, dirt clinging to her forearms, and looked back toward the last position. Nothing. Just trees. Just silence for now. The fog rolled in low, slow and quiet. It gathered in hollows, clung to tree trunks, and softened the sharp outlines of the forest's edge. For Elara, it was more than a shift in weather. It was a signal. Visibility was changing. Distances were harder to judge. Movement would need to be more deliberate. Sound would carry differently now. She adjusted the wrap of her ghillie net as she crouched beneath the twisted arch of an old tree, steam rising faintly from her gear. As sweat cooled in the damp air, her back ached from the crawl and her ribs pulled tight with each breath. But she didn't stop. There wasn't time, not for rest, not for recovery. She had seen too many patrols scatter through the terrain to assume they had fallen back. They were circling just like her. She didn't follow a straight path. That was the first rule of survival. Instead, she moved in a deliberate arc wide enough to avoid known contact zones, tight enough to stay within supporting distance of the SEAL team. The terrain cooperated bare. Roots curled like grasping fingers across the soil. Leaves clung to her elbows. Water beaded along her sleeves, seeping in slowly. Every step was chosen. Every angle of descent accounted for. She slid sideways beneath a low wall of stone and leaf. The barrel of her rifle angled down, one hand always trailing the dirt for balance. A soft bird call broke the silence, followed by another. Then none. A telltale hush returned. She paused and listened. Up the slope, dogs barked once, then twice. Not near, not far. She couldn't see them. but the sound carried on a line that told her everything she needed. They were searching in grids, using leash control, not free runners. That meant they hadn't locked onto scent yet. That gave her minutes, no more. She pushed deeper into a shallow draw, following the contour of the land. Her boots sank slightly into the loam. The ferns here were tall, almost waist-high, and wet from the lingering fog. She kept low, kept her head angled forward, her eyes scanning just above the line of brush. A voice cracked faintly over a radio in a foreign language, clipped commands. She froze. 20 feet ahead, 4 enemy soldiers moved past her. One held a leash with a German shepherd, its nose sweeping back and forth along the ground. Another carried a suppressed carbine, his eyes scanning high. They were well trained. Their spacing was tight, their pace slow. They weren't rushing. They were confident. Elara didn't blink. She didn't even breathe. The dog paused near her position, sniffed twice, then pulled left. The handler followed, guiding it back along the contour. They disappeared behind a small ridge, and the forest swallowed their sound. Still, Elara didn't move. A full minute passed, then another. The pressure behind her eyes eased just enough for her to adjust the grip on her rifle. She began crawling again, inching forward along the edge of a broken stump. Its interior was hollowed by age and insects, useless for concealment, but perfect for observation. She slipped around its far side and paused to survey the tree line ahead. Movement sharp and low, not animals. Another fire team. These ones crouched and moving fast across a ridgeline, headed toward where the SEALs had last radioed in. They were running a pincer, trying to cut the retreat. She exhaled slowly, slid into prone, and adjusted her scope. Her gloves were slick with soil, but her hands didn't shake. The sight picture settled. Her first shot dropped the point man with a clean thoracic hit. The others dove for cover. She moved instantly, not far, just 6 mode to a split in the ground where tree roots cracked the surface like ribs. There she set up again, scoped the new angles, and picked off the second man as he tried to retreat behind a rock shelf. The other 2 returned fire blindly. Bullets cracked against the stump behind her original position, wood splintering under force. Elara stayed low and slipped left, using the roll of the land to cover her withdrawal. She didn't need to finish them. She just needed to break the advance. Silence returned, but it was thinner now, more brittle. The radio in her ear crackled softly. "We're moving. Got eyes north. Still under threat. Anyone watching our 6?" She pressed the mic once. No words. She didn't have a free second to spare. Her response would be in steel, not voice. She reached a bend in the landscape, a cut in the slope that formed a natural funnel, and ducked behind a pile of wind-thrown branches. There she rewrapped her ghillie net, blending new vegetation into the weave. She added pieces of bark and moss, adjusting the tone of her silhouette. The net was no longer a cover. It was her skin. What little scent she carried was soaked into the forest already. She kept moving down another incline through the edge of a dried-out marsh bed, over slick stones that threatened to twist her ankle with every step. Each obstacle told her she was still alive, still one step ahead. At the far end of the basin, she paused beside a fallen tree that had shattered on impact. One of its splintered limbs formed a half-shelter, angled against a slope of moss and bark. She slid beneath it and settled into a new overwatch point. This wasn't permanent, nothing was, but it gave her one clean view of the forest edge, where the SEALs would reappear if they stayed on pace. She adjusted her rifle again and waited. The fog thickened. The enemy would keep circling. They had the numbers. They had the terrain. But they didn't have her. Elara exhaled once and watched the breath disappear into the grey. She was no longer just in the forest. She was part of it. The bullet struck Bark 4T from the SEAL team. Not a burst, not suppression. A clean, calculated shot. Elara didn't need a second to know what it meant. That was a sniper. She moved without radioing in, staying low as she followed the slope away from the ridge. The SEALs were breaking contact, shifting northeast. The enemy wasn't chasing them blindly anymore. They were changing tactics, bringing in someone who could do what she could. She slid into a shaded gap beneath a knot of brush and settled her rifle flat against the dirt. The light here was strange, fractured by fog and angled branches. She scanned the tree lines, slow, steady, no assumptions. Somewhere out there, someone was watching too. She needed to bait the line 20 motor uphill. A sharp-edged stump tilted at just the right angle. Behind it she propped a thin branch, bent forward at a tilt that might catch a scope's glare from a certain position. At its base, she placed a strip of dull cloth, torn from her backup wrap. The shape was wrong, the size was wrong, but from 400 meters through fog and adrenaline, it might look close enough. Then she circled back, careful to move low and wide. Her real position was a shallow cut in the hillside, where two roots forked out from a pine and dropped into the mud. From there she had a narrow angle toward the suspected line of fire. She waited. Nothing moved. Even the birds had gone quiet again. Then it came, brief, sharp, a glint, just for half a breath, no longer. A flash of light bouncing from glass. Elara narrowed her eyes and didn't move. The enemy had spotted her decoy and was watching, judging, waiting. That meant he wasn't alone. There would be a spotter, maybe a pair rotating positions, using hand signals or subtle whispers. But the lead shooter would be on glass just like her. She counted 10 seconds, then 15 more. Nothing. Elara adjusted her elevation, held her breath, and fired. The round struck Bark, just left of where she'd seen the glint. A clean miss, but by inches. Whoever he was, he'd moved. She shifted instantly, sliding back into the right, crawling under a curved log cracked by weather and age. She reset her rifle at a new angle, eyes already hunting the space where a counter-move might come. If he was smart, and he was, he'd relocate too, but he might try to catch her first, expecting her to resettle at the decoy. More time passed. Slow minutes, no shots. She scanned again, breathing shallow. Then she saw it. Barely a shadow, not even a shape, more like the absence of color behind a stretch of fern. There was no muzzle, no glass, just wrong texture. She centered the reticle and didn't blink. Her second shot was calm, quiet, final. The form dropped, no flinch, no delay, just collapse. She watched the brush for another minute. No movement, no follow-up. Either the spotter was too far to react, or there wasn't one. But the duel was over. She didn't wait for confirmation. She slid backward through the hollow, boots dragging slow, knees brushing root and stone. Every withdrawal was just as calculated as the approach. She didn't need to linger over it. There was no celebration, no satisfaction, only survival. She reached a bend in the terrain and rose to a crouch, eyes sweeping the undergrowth. The enemy sniper's body was half visible through the trees now, one arm stretched oddly, the rifle beside it still tucked into a tight shooting cradle. Whoever he was, he had trained for this, but he hadn't made it out. She didn't get close. Instead, she circled wide again, cutting through the edge of a fern-choked ditch and into a new pocket of elevation. Her hands worked without thinking. Gear checked, bolt reset, sling secured. She didn't speak, didn't radio. The SEALs didn't need to know how close it had been. All they needed was her eyes back on the path. She paused at the edge of a ridge, listening, distant movement, footsteps and gear shifting in sync. Her rifle came up again, steady and quiet. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't personal. It was geometry. Angles, patience. Whoever they had brought to stop her was done now. There wouldn't be another like him this deep in the field. She adjusted her ghillie once more, sweeping a hand through the nearby leaves to pull new cover across her shoulders. Her braids stuck to her back, sweat now cold from the wind, but she kept still. A bird fluttered to a low branch, then another. Sound returned. She exhaled slowly. It was done. Elara didn't have time to flank the ridge. The seals had reached the river bend, just short of the crossing point, but fire was already coming in hard from both sides. The ridge lines above the water had become kill zones, staggered with muzzle flashes and the dull thud of belt-fed weapons. The team was exposed. One wrong move, and they'd be swept off the bank. She scrambled up a root-choked incline, breath shallow, left shoulder burning from the graze she'd taken an hour earlier. The wound wasn't deep, but every jolt through her frame reminded her it was there. She reached the crest of a rock shelf, chest low to the earth, and let her rifle settle over the rise. No net this time, no concealment. There wasn't time for finesse. The fog had thinned. The tray line was open, and she had only one thing left to work with. Angle. From here, she had a direct line of sight to both enemy nests and the river below. It was exposed, but it was perfect. If she held it, she popped her last full magazine into the well and slid it home. 20 rounds. That would have to be enough. The first target was a machine gunner, firing short bursts down toward the river's edge. His silhouette stood tall, braced behind a rock outcrop. Elara adjusted for elevation, held her breath, and fired. He dropped backward without a sound. Two figures scrambled to recover the weapon. One had a radio. The other tried to swing the gun back around. She took the spotter first, then the gunner. The recoil jarred her elbow on the rock's edge, but she ignored it. The barrel was heating fast. She could smell it now, metal and grime cooking into the air. Her earpiece crackled. A clipped voice came through, pushed tight with effort. Crossing one by one, 5 seconds between. Hold that ridge. She didn't respond. She just watched. The first man broke from cover, sprinting across the gravel and into the river. The water reached his waist. He moved slow through the current, rifle overhead. Elara scanned for threats. None yet. The others would follow. She adjusted her position slightly, tracking motion on the opposite slope. Another team of enemy fighters was moving in, creeping along a trail just under the tray line. She didn't wait for them to set up. 2 shots, both clean. The last man ducked, blind firing through brush. She let him go. Wasting rounds wasn't an option. The second seal entered the river, then a third. Fire came in hard from the western ridge. Elara dropped low as bark shattered just above her. She crawled 3 meters left and braced behind a thin-trunked tree, its roots twisted and sharp against her arm. She brought the rifle up again, found the shooter, hit him through the scope lens before he could adjust. The bolt stuck slightly when she cycled it. She used the edge of her glove to knock it loose. The heat from the receiver scorched through the fabric, but she kept moving. 4th man in the water. The last one hadn't moved yet. The seals were calling to him, urging him forward, but he was hesitating, probably watching too much of the upper ridge. Elara looked there too, saw the barrel rising just behind a stone, faint, but steady. Squad leader or sniper. Either way, it was the one that mattered. She leaned higher over the ridge, giving up some of her cover, took the shot. The rifle kicked hard. The figure dropped instantly. She ducked back behind the ridgeline, wiped sweat from her eyes, then pushed back to check the crossing. The last man was in the water now, almost waist deep. They were all moving, wounded or not. She let out a slow breath and scanned behind them. No more pursuers, no more movement. The final 2 rounds stayed chambered. She would hold them until she was sure. Seconds passed, then a minute. Her hand shook once, then steadied. The rifle cooled against her arm, steam rising off the metal. The tree above her creaked under wind. It couldn't fully block. The radio chirped again, quieter this time. "We're across. Still moving. You good?" She didn't answer right away. She eased back from the ridge, rifle still raised, and watched the river disappear into the trees. She couldn't see them anymore. That meant they were gone, safe or not. They were out. She clicked her mic once. Then she moved. The forest had changed. Where it had once held tension in every shadow, it now moved softly in the wind, its branches sagging under the weight of fog. The gunfire was gone. The voices were gone. Only distant echoes remained, like the memory of movement. Elara walked slowly through the undergrowth, boots silent against wet soil, rifle cradled tight against her chest. She didn't follow a trail. There wasn't one. She moved by feel and memory, retracing the wide arc that had once kept her invisible. Her body ached in familiar places. Shoulder, ribs, thighs, each bruise earned, each cut accounted for. Sweat had dried into salt against her collar. Her glove was torn from the heat of the bolt, and her left knee stung with every step. But she didn't stop. Somewhere behind her, the seals were still moving deeper into the terrain and toward their next link-up. They had made the river. That was what mattered. She had held the line long enough for them to break through. That was her role. It always had been. She passed a stretch of ferns and spotted the edge of a stump she had used 2 hours earlier. From the right angle, it was still shaped like a prone shooter, her old hide now useless. The ground around it was torn by splintered wood and heel marks. She didn't pause. She let the image slide past her and kept going. The fog deepened as she neared the LZ. The moon was behind cloud cover now, and the trees swayed with the weight of wind that never quite reached the ground. Her shadow moved beside her, barely more than a suggestion. She adjusted the sling on her rifle and shifted the weight of her pack, the strap worn thin against her shoulder. Every movement was deliberate, not rushed, not cautious, just complete. She heard distant voices, once angry, urgent, fractured by terrain. They were too far to follow, too scattered to matter. Patrols probably looking for what was never there anymore. The path dipped. A patch of soft ground gave way beneath her boot, and she slid a step, caught herself on a tree root, then straightened again. No sound followed. Nothing chased her. The forest swallowed everything. She found the black stump at the edge of the fallback zone, just past a split in the terrain. It was tall, wide, charred at its base from a long-past lightning strike. No markers, no flare. It didn't need to be signaled. If you knew where it was, you knew what it meant. Elara stepped beside it and rested her back against the bark. Her legs were shaking slightly now, but she didn't sit. Above the tray line, a faint blinking light appeared. Not loud, not bright, just enough to draw the eye if you knew where to look. The helicopter was inbound, still 20 minutes out by the sound of it. She didn't reach for her radio. She didn't speak. She let the wind pass through the trees and let her breath slow. Her rifle remained in her hands, not slung. There was no need to put it away. It wasn't finished. It wasn't ever finished. Even now, even here, it was a part of her body she didn't think to release. The fog curled tighter around the stump. A bird lifted off a low branch and disappeared into the trees. She glanced upward once, then down again. The light blinked twice more through the mist, steady now. The flight crew would land without waiting. They'd seen her, or they'd seen enough to know she was still there. No one would ask how close it had been. No one would ask how many shots it had taken. She had held the ridge, she had cleared the river. The team was moving. That was the report. The rest stayed with her. She stepped away from the stump as the trees trembled gently beneath the pressure of approaching rotors. The sound was muffled, rounded by fog, but it was clear now, closer than before. She didn't wave, she didn't raise a hand. She just stood there, waiting in the stillness she had earned. She never asked to be seen. Elara moved through the trees, not for glory, but because someone had to. Every decision, every shot, every step she took was made with purpose, not for recognition, but for the safety of those around her. In a world that often praises the loudest voice, she proved that true strength can live in silence. She held the line without applause. She disappeared without a name, and still she delivered. This story was about more than survival. It was about self-worth, found in commitment, independence shaped by trust in your own choices, and the quiet power of showing up when no one is watching.